Welcome back to Dysregulated. As always, I'm your host, Josh, and with me are Jeff and Vince. And today we're going to explore a little bit about the diagnosis that mystifies everybody, ADHD. Another week, another diagnosis. Let's get into it. But first, how are you guys doing? How is life? How is, family's doing well? Everything good?
We're good.
No complaints over here. Just, looking forward to warmer weather, even though I felt like I was tired of it by the end of the summer last year.
I got to tell you, though, I'm coming out of having just done some appointments this evening. I can't even talk. Sorry, I just washed my tongue and I can't do a thing with it. No, I just did an initial consult and totally jazzed. The woman that came in, I know we're talking about trauma next time. I love it. She's literally sitting here in my office crying, talking about the stuff that's going on in her life. That's not why I like the initial consult, trust me. But as she's crying and she's beginning to feel validated, she's listening to what I'm saying about the EEG, the over arousal, all of the stuff that she's dealing with and how it has sabotaged her life. And then she was like, I'm in. Let's do this. I just got to get all of our appointments scheduled. I'm ready to go. And you have no idea. I'm going to go tell every one of my friends. This makes so much sense. And that's what I love. I'm sorry. So I'm kind of on a high right now. Really feeling like I love what I do.
And when I met her for about 30 seconds, just introduced myself, shook her hand. I could see the excitement in her eye. It was it was like radiant. Yeah, it's awesome.
One of my favorite things is it's going to be 3-4 months from now when I see her and the central nervous system's calming down and she's getting a handle on her life. I love it. That's that chills. Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned it a second ago. We're talking about the diagnosis that is confusing and it just seems to be all over the place. You put it really well.
Oh, I guess I'm jazzed tonight. Maybe I've got too much caffeine in me or something like that. We are tonight going to take the nonsensical diagnosis and we are going to help you make sense of ADHD. The whole world knows that ADHD is a term that just doesn't fit. It describes something, right? So don't hear me to say that there are no symptoms that need to be taken seriously. There are. We want to take those seriously. The problem is that we are coagulating all of these disparate symptoms that frankly have to do with, I would tell you the way I organize it, 5 completely different symptom clusters that involve multiple areas of the brain that are completely unrelated, giving us no less than 15 different biomarkers. And you combine these things together, take any 2, 3, 4 of these biomarkers, put them in a bag, shake them around, and out come ADHD. Same diagnosis for such a wide variety. And you know what? We're going to have so much fun tonight because we're going to make it make sense. And I bet you guys are going to love listening to this appointment because it's going to make sense to you.
Let's hope. Okay. It'll make more sense than, the government's making now since they just got rid of pennies. But sorry, bad dad joke.
Lincoln. So honestly, a great place to start with it, guys, is kind of like where we commonly conceptualize this is the DSM-5. And so, like, kind of just touching on that, right? Like, in the book, we have an inattentive type and we have a hyperactive or impulsivity-based type, right? And you have these categories of symptoms, right? And we talk all the time about how important symptom consideration is to us. We have these 2 categories and you need 6 or more out of each category. I'm not going to really like hold you guys and list all of this, but I am going to say that for under the age of 12, and they do specify some of these symptoms should have been present prior to the age of 12. Tell me, is it not expected for a kid under the age of 12 to have a hard time waiting their turn? maybe interrupting, maybe fidgeting. So when we start to look at the list of symptoms and they kind of follow that pattern, you go, who hasn't experienced those things, especially prior to the age of 12? That right there should kind of start to shift how we conceptualize.
Yeah, I am so thinking we're going to get into trouble tonight. I don't know,
Maybe a
with
little
this
bit.
No, I'm just kidding. That's okay. We need to agitate the system a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and it's not to say none of what we're going to talk about over, whether it's last week, this week, the next coming few weeks, we don't want to discredit the DSM. It's been very helpful in determining and labeling like what's going on, right? And giving therapists, frankly, across the world, the same footholds. It gives that a language. Thank you. What we want to do is take it a step further and challenge it and push back in a couple areas where ADHD is a diagnosis, sure, but what are these different ways that these symptoms actually, right? Because there's multiple different ways that you can get the same outcome. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. You can get the same outcome of symptom presentations, but like you said, there's 5 different clusters of 5 different ways almost that you can get to that point. Now, would it surprise you to know that all of these different 5, clusters that we're talking about should be treated differently, right? How many times do you hear somebody's, medicated for ADHD and it just doesn't really work for them? Like I feel like I hear that now again, I'm not, I don't prescribe medication. That's not at all my license at all. But I just see this happen so much especially with kids. Like they're prescribed a medication and it doesn't really work. And then they're prescribed another one. It kind of works, but what the biomarkers show is that there's multiple ways to get to the same end result, right? And we want to say, sure, you can label it the same end result, but why don't we specify some different, some differences, because they should be treated differently.
Yeah. So we were mentioning the 5 different kind of general clusters of symptoms. And when you look at it, the 5 general clusters are going to be attention, right? Things that have to do with focus and attention. You have hyperactivity, right? You've got mood reactivity. You have impulse control, and you have executive function, right? Sometimes people look at mood reactivity and impulsivity. They put those together. They're absolutely very clearly distinct when you start looking at an EEG. So I differentiate those out. So we're going to kind of probably work with all of those different things: attention, hyperactivity, mood reactivity, impulse control, and executive function. You'll hear us say these things and refer back to them. 5 very different symptom clusters, and yet we categorize them all under this concept of ADHD. Now, before we jump into it, I do want to go back and confirm, there are absolutely times when talk-based counseling are crucial and critical in the treatment and enabling people to manage and cope with the ADHD. We also want to confirm that there are times when medication is 100% the right solution for people that are struggling with these symptoms. I've seen it multiple times. It's the best and the only thing that I've seen work well. Okay, so I'm not wanting in any way, shape, or form for anybody that's trying to troll us out there or anything like that, or gets concerned about us. I'm not trying to take away from what does work. What I'm trying to do and what we're all trying to bring attention to is there's an entirely different dimension that we can look at that provides a better theoretical framework, a better perspective by which to see and view ADHD than what is, I would say, arguably the dominant view of DSM. I think that there's a better way to do it. And what I want to do more than anything is challenge it by providing a better solution, right? You're going to hear me say this over and over again. If I criticize it, Please don't take it personally. Do the work of examining and evaluating, and let's figure out what works better. My goal is always to find a solution, not to point fingers.
Absolutely, because a roadblock as a talk-based therapist for quite some time now is when I have someone who is looking to talk their way out of ADHD. I'll have a parent or a grandparent bringing in a young person, 13 years old, let's say, and you got to understand how horrible this is at school. And it's like, okay, do you think that any of those attentional or hyperactivity issues are going to be better when they've already fought through that school day and now they have to sit with me in the office? And a lot of times that's where I do default to exercise and martial arts, because I have to get on the same page with that, right? But I think ADHD is like the cheap mask at Party City. Like, you didn't have a costume for Halloween, so you bought that same just plain one that everybody has. I think that like famous dance crew, the Jabberwockies, they all wore it, right? 99-cent mask. I'm going to look cool on Halloween, right? But it's like, all right, there's a lot of things that are behind this. There's a lot of things that are behind those symptoms that as a therapist, I found myself, well, maybe I need to address this instead. Maybe I need to address the hypervigilance. Oh, wow, there's some trauma behind it, right? There's a lot of different features that could be behind that.
So let's start at the top. Let's talk about attention.
Sorry, what were you saying? Sorry, I zoned out. Sorry.
Wow.
That was pretty bad. Sorry, but all right.
Hey, that was smooth. I thought it was good.
Yeah.
All of our listeners who aren't watching on YouTube are going to be so confused at what just happened. They're like, it just went quiet. I don't understand.
So when it comes to attentional networks, right, your brain has to focus on certain things. Every moment of every day, your brain is making decisions about what to pay attention to. Right now, those of you who are listening to the podcast, hopefully this is the most important thing in your world. You're listening to us. You chose to listen to us. However, if you're driving down the road and somebody starts honking a horn at you, guess what? Your attention's going to shift. And you're going to start paying attention to whatever that honking horn was trying to warn you about. And then once you figure that out, you're going to get back to driving and listening to our podcast because your attention is focused on us. And maybe while you're driving down the road, all of a sudden, wah, 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 wah. And that's how I actually got knocked over by a gorilla when I was 17 years old in the Congo.
True story.
True story, by the way.
I was there. I was not there.
But you go, wait, you were talking about ADHD. How did we get into gorilla linebackers? What are you talking about? How did I missed it? Well, your attentional network kind of broke up a little bit. When we look at biomarkers, there's three primary things that we find in terms of breakdown of attentional networking. Two of them are zone outs, which is exactly what I just gave you an example of. And one of them is squirrel. Oh my gosh, what's going on over there? Pop. Oh, I'd really love to paint the wall. Josh, what do you think about putting a red up on that wall over there? Would that look good? Do you like that? Right? Completely different. So when we start talking about attentional and inattentional problems and what it is that affects the attention, there's at least three of them that don't even have to do with anything that has to do with trauma or sensory issues.
Yeah, that sounded like, there is a difference when it comes to distractibility in terms of what might actually be important to be distracted by, right? And then when it can become a runaway train and every change in the environment is an opportunity to stray from what, people expect you to stare at.
Yeah. Well, what we want to jump into I can jump into a couple of them. You want to get a couple?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go with squirrel. We're gonna kind of squirrel this one, right?
We have heard this one before.
We have heard this one.
What is it called?
The famous.
I just had I had not the squirrel moment. I had to zone out.
So it's not scripted.
This was not done. Yeah.
Actually, that was probably a different facet because I was paying as much attention as one could.
You were thinking of so much stuff that you were not paying. This is a great example. Somebody that just zoned out because they were thinking about something else is one of our models for what can happen. A busy brain has a hard time staying on task. And it's not even because of the squirrel.
You should put me in a little bit of a petri dish, okay? And you guys can ask me varying degrees of difficult questions, and we can highlight all of this for them.
And the later it gets, we're videoing this podcast at night. The later it gets, the more likely I am to lose my train of thought, which is a different thing. Okay, so that's great. We just kind of gave one example right there. If you've got a super busy brain, oftentimes related to over arousal, to racing thoughts, to a high level of activation and action going on in your brain, sounds a bit more like anxiety. The actual root is over arousal, so much busyness. I can't stay on what's going on here. I'm getting bored.
I swear I wasn't. I swear I was not.
No, it's all good. And then, so that's one of them. But let's look at the other one that'll have to do with a lot of the distractibility kind of stuff is popcorn. Popcorn of the brain. It's called beta spindles. And a lot of times what we get a pop of electrical activity that destabilizes your attentional network. Josh, you would go ahead. You were going back to
I was
versus the unstable, right?
I was just going to ask, right? Yeah, that's an example of an unstable feature. But what's the difference? We've talked about, I think, Vince, it might have been a couple episodes ago, you mentioned having F1, F2 beta spindles and how that's tied to anger. Now, all of a sudden, you're telling me it's beta spindles can be tied to attention. What differentiates those?
Oof. I mean, honestly, like anger emerges from the inability to meet the expectations of the moment. That is such a distraction, right? And I do remember just distinctly kind of zeroing in on the auditory side of things for me, right? Where it's like several sounds will lead to that spindle. It is such a distraction in that moment that it leads to a bit of internal fury, right? Like that. And that's a great question, because honestly, I feel like it helps me explore it even further. And a lot of times there is also a need to move. And I feel like that kind of brings us into a different one, which is like that hyperactivity feature, right? And there's a part of our brain right in the middle that is kind of like our movement center, right? Like, and if we have a certain biomarker or, set of features there, it's kind of like having somebody in your head saying, move right now. And there might not be a reason to move. There's no reason to move. Keep moving. Yeah. Move in the middle of your sleep. So a lot of times we see that as something that shows up when someone says, I'm waking up 7-8 times in the night. Well, are you going to the bathroom? No, that's not it. I wake myself up. I'm startled. And it's like, oh, okay. Right. A lot of times I see people really going over the top with supplements and melatonin and, taking a lot of sleep aids, over the counter stuff. And it's just interesting to see, like, well, that's an entirely different route than the source of the issue.
Yeah. So think of beta spindles all the time. It's a destabilizing feature, right? A lot of anxiety features end up being rooted in rigidity. Got it. Sorry, that one just took a little while to get out. Rigidity. Okay, you're stuck. There we go. I feel like Elmer Fudd right now. With a lot of the features associated with ADHD, a lot more of them are destabilized processes in your brain. So a beta spindle, the net effect, they're not pathology, they're not unusual. Probably, I would estimate somewhere in the area of a quarter of the population will have beta spindles of some form or another somewhere in their brain. So if you have them in the frontal regions, particularly in here I am popping my microphone. If you've got it right up in this, what we call anterior cingulate region, this is a major switching center for the attention, whatever it is that you're focusing on. I decide what I want to focus on basically in that part of the brain. So right now, Josh, I can look at you and I can say, I'm doing a podcast right now and I want to stay focused on everything that's going on. Or I could turn over to Vince and say, just switched over to him in my anterior cingulate. Hey, buddy, let's start talking some Magic the Gathering cards, man. Do you ask for anything? We're out of the closet nerds, all of us. We play games like MTG.
I fought back so many nerd references up until now.
There you go.
Now they can come out.
It's hard to pop out. I'm very sorry about that. Okay, I just took us down a rabbit hole. Why? I chose to shift my attention. Now, what happens if you get poppage in there? What if you get a beta spindle that goes off while you're trying to stay focused on something? Well, it's going to derail you. So here I am, and again, I'll snap my finger as the popcorn moment. I'm talking to you, and oh my gosh, I wonder, how does this microphone work? This is actually kind of cool. It really, look at that little. You have a red light too? Oh, he has a red light too. Isn't that interesting? Oh my gosh, I wonder what. My wife is getting pizza right now. I hope she brings me home some, right? Every time that pop goes off, it's going to derail whatever it is that you're focused on. We get the squirrel type ADHD. Now let's distinguish that from something like mood instability. Guess what? Anterior cingulate, frontal regions. If you get a more generalized presentation of beta spindle in that frontal region, well, think about it. As we talked about last time, people with a lot of excess beta in the frontal regions have anxiety of the racing thoughts, ruminative type, that oftentimes is associated with excess emotion. So you're pushing down the emotion, pushing it down, pushing it down, pushing it down. What happens if you get a beta spindle while you're trying to contain and control? Now I'm angry. Now I'm sad. I've actually had, like, most of the time we see it as anger outbursts, right? So again, let's link this back over while we're on it. The biomarker for emotional mood reactivity, one of them is beta spindles, generally speaking, in the frontal region that disrupts their ability to manage their emotions. That's the kid that will be sitting there 4 out of 5 times, manages his emotion well, but the 4th time, like maybe let's say the kid is interacting with his friend. You know, you've got a child interacting with his friend, and they're working on a project together, and they're interacting, and he's getting a little bit frustrated with the project, but he holds it down. Beta spindle, you idiot, and pushes the kid, or, you know, jabs him with a pencil or something like that. Typically a beta spindle moment. It's random, but not irrational. They tend to hit pretty quickly. They resolve relatively quickly. And then the client that has it feels like an idiot. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that. I know I wasn't supposed to do that. Now, it's a reason. It's not an excuse. But beta spindles in the frontal lobe, you either get distractibility, anterior cingulate, distractibility type ADHD, or you get impulse control problems.
So you're telling me that somebody can share a feature, right? A specific feature in the EEG, but depending on where it happens, it could give you a different symptom. That's what
Right, because if those spindles were more central, would that not be the move?
Correct. Yep. In fact, if you get particularly intense beta spindles in that area, sometimes the presentation could be facial tics.
That's actually really interesting. I haven't seen that.
That's cool. Not too frequently, but it does happen. And when we get it at the vertex, beta spindles right in the center line of, in the cingulate region of that motor strip is associated with insomnia, which is what you were talking about. It's almost as if all night long somebody's nudging you. That beta spindle goes off and it just nudges you. And these are folks that will regularly feel themselves come.
That was such a great experiential moment. Like, as someone who touts himself as an experiential therapist, Jeff just totally rocked it on me right there. That was great.
Did you wake up?
I did that.
If you're listening on Spotify or something, you need to go and watch the video of that specific moment. Vince's face was priceless right there. Like, you could, like, imagine the rage, like at like 2:00 in the morning when you can't sleep because your brain's beta spindling. Imagine that rage that you'd have. That's what Vince just had in that moment. Jeff, what are you doing?
Just bobbling around over here. But yeah, and so I feel like an interesting, thing that I learned in working through, studying neurofeedback and learning about these biomarkers is learning about the relationship between biomarkers and considering something called the theta to beta ratio. So if we're talking about like an instability feature, like beta spindles, those crackles, those explosions of beta, right? But then we also say we can't villainize beta. Beta is that like critical thinking. We need it. We need it in very important times, right? But then what's theta? We haven't talked about theta much in the podcast, right? That's like daydreamy. that's like, doesn't daydreamy kind of represent like the pleasant side of a zone out? Like, right? Like where you would want to go if you had the time to zone out and it was intentional. But so when you start to consider the ratio between that zone out, daydreamy state, which is also important for things like emotional consolidation, memory consolidation, things like that. But you consider that ratio with the critical thinking wave of beta, and you start to get a different look at attentional problems, right?
Yeah, think of theta to beta ratio as being like, and again, this is not how you drive a car, but having one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator. Mm-hmm. And theta is almost like the brake. It's the one that slows you down, brings you internally, makes you daydreamy, introspective. And beta is the one that's external orientation and awareness, active thinking. It's like the accelerator. So which one? You need more accelerator than brake in order to make your car move forward. So that is one of your features. Well, and actually while we're on it, let's go back to some of that kind of theta activity. Sometimes we get bursts of theta activity, or theta wave could be a little bit faster, maybe alpha frequency band, but you'll get this theta, I call them poofs. It's my professional term, is a poof in the temporal region, and that results in a zone out. It just disrupts your focus and attentional networks, because it's in language. Sorry, I just had a poof. But because it's in a languaging, sorry, I was trying to illustrate. Because it's in the languaging center, a lot of the ways that it'll manifest are, I'm talking and I lose my train of thought. I'm listening and wah happens, and then you got to pick back up again. Or you're reading through a book and you get halfway through the page, poof, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what? I got to read that again. So that's a zone out form. And then there's another zone out form that actually is related back to really bad sleep. Disruptions in sleep, we call it labile vigilance. Your brain kind of blurs the line between being awake versus asleep. And so during the day, these little micro sleeps occur. And so your brain zones out, has to reorganize, reorient itself. And then you're like, okay, wait, what did you just say something, Vince? Did I miss that?
Wait, what did you just say?
Right. And we're going to have way too much fun with this, unfortunately. So there you have it. We just went through 4 different ways in which you get 2 distractibility and 2 different zone out formats. And we've also talked about one of the ways in which your brain can dysregulate in order to generate a mood impulse problem, mood reactivity.
All of these are diagnosed as ADHD, though. Do you guys understand what we're talking about when we say it doesn't really make sense other than just like a generic thing? Because they're all, when you look at the EEG, all these are different. That's the thing. Mm-hmm. Every single one of these is a different property in the electrical current of your brain that's predisposing you to these different symptoms. But a lot of times when somebody comes in, they're like, well, I have trouble paying attention. And it's kind of it's hard to put into words, especially when you don't know this exists and this is how we function, right? Sorry, Vince, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no, I mean, that was a really, really good point to make. And I think about, like, labile vigilance and the fact that there's a lot of people walking around this world that don't realize that if they close their eyes for a couple minutes, their brain is going into like early stage sleep because of things like this, right? And we've also seen like really cool sides of neurofeedback where when we can read in an EEG different activity between eyes open and eyes closed, sometimes we can recommend that someone will naturally calm the rhythms of their brain by closing their eyes and taking away that one very important sense. But yeah, we think about, sleep as being so important to everybody, and a lot of people not even necessarily understanding the implications it has throughout the rest of their day, but not only, why their sleep might be so disturbed.
Yeah, we regularly will discover that individuals don't necessarily have ADHD, they have insomnia. Mm-hmm. And it's an undiagnosed, and again, please understand, I recognize that I do not have the licensure or the credentials to diagnose insomnia. I'm not saying that I'm going to diagnose it. But what I'm saying is that we'll look at a brain and we will see all the evidence of exhaustion, poor sleep, that there are indicators suggesting that an individual's sleep architecture at night is probably being disrupted. They might sleep for 8 or 9 hours and wake up and still feel exhausted. Well, ask yourself the question, if you're sleep deprived, and most people rule it out because they got 8 or 9 hours of sleep, but if you're sleep deprived, what are the qualities and characteristics of the symptoms that emerge from that? Well, I'm more irritable. I have worse attention. My executive function goes down and I zone out a lot. You must have ADHD. And I look at it and I go, no, you don't. You're exhausted. And so we'll refer people out to a sleep study. And once they begin to actually work through the sleep issues and get sleep, guess what? A well-rested brain tends to focus well, executive function goes up, memory improves, all kinds of things that improve when you get sleep taken care of. This is why I'm saying is there's so much out there that doesn't make sense with the diagnosis, but when you take a look under the hood and read that EEG, now all of a sudden it starts coming alive.
Totally. And, it makes a ton of sense. And when you think about, all different types of features of ADHD and the way that, I think we can agree that they can emerge from stress that is anticipated, right? Like there are certain stressors that are going to distract focus. There's stressors that are going to make you feel like you cannot, attune to one thing. And there's certain ones that we would all agree make sense and are appropriate. I think that the lines really blur, and there's a lot of issues when people start to judge that based on, what works for me. And I'm going to tell you what you should be able to pay attention to, right? Unless we look inside someone's brain, we don't know how easy that is.
Yeah. I like to what, this was a conversation we had a while ago, but we live in a culture that's very, unforgiving to people who can't focus, right? Like when you have these sort of ADHD features, it's so difficult. Like I think you said it actually in a couple episodes ago, right? When your brain's constantly like looking around, trying to figure out what's going on, that's advantageous when you're out and surviving in nature. But then all of a sudden you go in the classroom, you're trying to look around and, the school teacher's like, hey, go back, do your homework. It's not natural for them to focus on the homework. But I want to go on to another form of the clusters, right? I think we've made it through 2 so far. What was our?
We did the attentional stuff. We talked a little bit about mood reactivity.
Hyperactivity is where I was going.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I just had an ADHD moment there.
There we go. We can hit the hyperactivities. That's good. 3 different ways that you'll get hyperactivity minimum. And one of them, right, you were talking about that, Vince, was the motor strip is being told move. And so you'll be exactly
pay it forward. Yeah.
And so I think I just had a zone out moment there. There we go. No, but your brain is activating the motor strip. And so you feel like you want to move all the time, even if you don't want to move. The problem with this is, what's the theory behind giving somebody a stimulant?
It like has the opposite effect to someone who doesn't benefit from it for traditional ADHD purposes.
Yeah. But a stimulant is basically given to somebody on the theory that ADHD is an under-aroused brain and
you can't focus, and giving the drug will make it focus more.
Correct. So the studies show that the effect of most stimulants on an EEG are to decrease theta, which I'll talk a little bit more about that. Theta is that introspective, daydreamy, I'm in my head, let's put the brakes on my attentional and my executive functioning centers, right? So it's going to decrease theta and delta, slower wave activity, and it's going to enhance and increase beta. But if your hyperactivity is already caused by excess beta, what do you think a stimulant is likely to do to that brain?
It's not going to help.
Yeah, they're going to be like that squirrel in Over the Hedge. If you've ever seen that movie that drinks a caffeine drink, one of my favorite scenes. So that's one way in which you can have over-arousal. Makes total sense to us, but then you have to distinguish it from the forms that actually are generated by under-arousal and what we would call, right, auto stabilization mechanisms. Under arousal is when you have excess things like theta in your brain that's under arousing you. You're in a state of under arousal. You don't want to stay present. You don't want to stay focused. And so you can give that person a stimulant and it'll work very well to get them activated. Now, my whole point on this is instead of giving them a medication, why don't we just teach your brain how to take the foot off the brake?
Instead of, I mean, what the drug's doing is it's like an external, factor pulling your foot off, or, forcing it down depending on what you need to do.
Yeah. And then the third way that you would see it is just a tired person. If you've got a tired brain, you're going to have somebody that's going to respond really well to, a stimulant. And you're going to have somebody that will agitate themselves, over-arouse themselves, become hyperactive in order to stay awake. This is, I admit it, this is something that I deal with, is that when I get tired, right, fidgeting, when I get tired, you'll see my knee start to go. I'll tap. I'm a tapper all the time. I love my fingers will get going. I remember growing up, my grandfather used to do that all the time. This Shoots continues to do it, carrying on the tradition. Tap, tap, tap. Yep. Why do I do that? Because I'm tired. I have to do something to stimulate myself to stay awake. But you can see that in the brain. So there you go. We got.
That's pretty amazing. And I'm sitting here as quite the opposite, actually. And I was thinking about it. Maybe it was a little ADHD voyage I took as we were talking there, but I was like, geez, man, if someone had given me a stimulant, right? Like I do feel like I have certain attentional issues, but I'm also constantly wanting to move. I just don't think it would work out. And like I said, like we always say, we're not knocking it when, it's the best method for the specific situation and individual, right? I do want to draw attention to something when we have a diagnosis and we have a presentation or an issue that can, pretty much have so many different characters behind the same mask. I've had a lot of people come to me and ask for this diagnosis for medication. They come in and they want something, and I'm like, I hope you know that I can't prescribe that. And they're like, well, I just want the diagnosis, meaning they want to take that label that I give them and go, shop around with it. And it's sad to find out sometimes then it's like, well, all right, cool. Well, you get a medication provider. I'll do talk-based therapy for you. You've got some other stuff going on, right? And you find, well, how's it going with the meds? You notice any different? I only take them when I want to. Gave a couple to my buddy. And I mean, I'm not, scoffing at this. It's a really big concern for me, right? When I see that as being, I would say probably like, I'll be realistic, 1/8 of the people that I've dealt with ADHD are inconsistent with the medication that they take. They're taking it at will. They're overusing it, underusing it, selling it to friends and sharing it. And that just makes me look at the whole picture a little bit differently. You have to,
That's good. Well, so what about the difference between executive function and what was the other name? Sorry, I'm zoning out as well. Lost my train of thought.
Well,
it's getting late, guys.
Well, looking at executive function, right? The primary issue with executive function is going to be excess slow wave activity in that frontal region, right? If you remember, when we talked about anxiety, it was excess beta in the frontal lobes. Why? Because the frontal lobes are the cause and effect thinking. It's the place where you're thinking, processing, cause and effect, linear kinds of logic. And when you have excess theta in that area, it almost acts like Novocaine. It's like it's shutting it down. It's telling it go to sleep. It's telling it to go offline. And so, right, I'll kind of give the example of, for instance, let's say there's you've got a 13-year-old daughter. She comes home from school. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. And you as the mom look at her and say, okay, hun, we've got a really busy afternoon. You've got soccer practice from 5 to 6:30. Then from there, we're going to get a quick bite to eat. And then we're going to run over. You've got youth group from 7 to 9. And then once you get home, it's time for bed. You got to get up for school tomorrow. So how about you get your homework done? And she looks and goes, okay. Silence. Nothing happens. And mom goes, Susie, are you going to get your homework done? Okay. Yeah, I heard you, mama. Oh, okay. When are you going to do it? I don't know. Susie, I just told you that we have to leave in an hour and a half to get to soccer. You won't have a chance to get anything done later. Yeah. So do your homework. Do it now. Oh, okay. Now, the reason I go into that, and some of you hopefully will be laughing, going, oh man, you just nailed my kid. That's exactly what's going on. But why do they do that? Because the cause and effect center, the linear thinking, A leads to B leads to C, is under-roused, shut off, and they're just not computing the data. And in order for them to start computing it, sometimes mom has to go, Susie! Mom gets angry, upset, and now all of a sudden Susie's like, okay, I'll get it done. They have to override the brake, right? I like to say a lot of times executive function for folks that have this problem, you've got to motivate them that even while the brake is on, they got to jam down the accelerator and down the road, you've got this squeaking wheeled kind of dysregulated mess that's trying to move the frontal lobes forward. And that's a lot of the executive function issues. Now, interestingly enough, these are also going to be the folks that are in their heads a lot, right? Because theta is a beautiful, daydreamy, in your head, creative kind of an idea. In fact, a lot of folks that have this feature are also very creative. They love to read. They love to write. They write music. They do artwork. So now just keep in mind, if we train down theta in the frontal regions, you will not lose your creativity. You simply gain the ability to turn it off when you need to. The problem is rigidly you're stuck. We need to give you flexibility on that.
That's a great point. And I think that's something I wanted to highlight earlier in the episode too. You don't lose any of, like, some people consider their ADHD a superpower, right? I remember back to high school days talking to people who are like, yeah, I just hyper focus on my homework and get it done super quick. You know, that I don't want to lose that superpower by doing neurofeedback. Well, you're not going to lose it. You're going to have a little bit more control over, you know, how and when it happens, right? And I think that's a great thing to kind of put it as a disclaimer on neurofeedback, is that we're not just like training you to be average, right? We talked about that earlier. There's no average brain. There's no normal quote unquote brain. It's all about, hey, what does your brain like to do? What does it want to do? What does it naturally do? What's your phenotype? And how do we make it even better? How do we, take your body type and write you a workout plan to complement your body type, right? If you have really strong legs and noodle arms, hey, let's do enough to maintain your legs, but let's work on your arms. Let's work on your abs. Let's work on other places, or, vice versa, whatever that is.
It's funny because anytime anybody brings up something fitness related, I can jump to mental health on that. Right. And so you have people that, and for my fitness enthusiasts out there, you guys can attest, people go to the gym and they beeline right for their favorite piece of equipment. What's their favorite piece of equipment? Not what they should be doing. It's not what they need to improve on the most. It's what they're already best at. It's what they're always strongest at, right? So Monday nights, you get all the dudes come peacocking in, heading right over to the bench press. And within 3 years, they're going to have some serious imbalance-based issues, likely shoulder impingements, maybe torn rotator cuffs. Mental health is that way too. People want to focus on the work that they want to do, when a lot of times what needs to be addressed is some of the stuff that, granular, nitty-gritty, things that might be difficult, right? And with that comes new concepts. We're trying to complement what's already out there. We want to be a part of, the treatment plan that exists if what's working is working well, but not well enough, right? We need to find that thing that's going to tip the scale. And that's really what our whole point is throughout exploring all of these diagnoses, that you go, people have been talking about these for a very long time. It's yep, but we can always talk about them a little bit differently.
And can I point out too, how will you know if you don't look? That's the question I want to pose to listeners at home. How will you know in what way you can parent your kid better that has ADHD? How can you do all these things differently, whether it's your relationship with your spouse or your kid or your parent or, even a coworker, a friend, whatever it may be? How will you know unless you look? right? If you identify with something that we've talked about, talk to us about doing a QEEG. Even if you, for some reason, wouldn't want to do neurofeedback, come and get your QEEG done because it reveals so much about how you function. And one of my favorite examples of this is a guy named Brandon who I went to school with in college. And when he came up and interned with us at the Nervation Center here, right? Drove like 8 hours to intern away from home. And he took his QEEG. He didn't have time during his internship to train. So what does he do? He takes his QEEG and he does a little research and finds this awesome way for him to study, basically like a study guide, like skeleton for him to fill in and say, all right, I'm going to study real hard for 10 minutes and then I'm going to take a break for 10 minutes. I'm going to study hard for 10 minutes, right? So there's so many different ways you can apply it. I would encourage you, like, again, if you identify with something that you've heard, give it a go, you know?
I like what you were saying too about, you know, if you wonder about it, why not figure out specifically where it's coming from? One of the things that I've done, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I do work with families, and I've done a couple of different conferences when I've run a seminar on using QEEG analysis to better understand your child to figure out best practices for discipline. Okay. And the example I always use is that mood reactivity. Right. And one of the things that I make the point on is there are 4 different biomarkers that are going to be related to a very similar presentation of mood destabilization. Your kid gets angry, loses his stuff, and now you go, how do I discipline it? And half the time the dads are coming in going, let me at him. I'm going to I'm going to put the fear of God in him. I'm going to be the big male elephant in the room. And I'm going to just tell him, you got to stop it, you know? And then you've got the mom that goes, no, I think we just need to protect him and we need to listen, or vice versa. I've seen it go either way. And people are looking at each other going, we don't know how to parent this one. Guess what? I got insight into this because each one of these different ways of dysregulating over mood reactivity, they're different and require different parenting technique. One of them is related to the beta spindles we talked about before. If you have a beta spindle type mood reactivity, pop goes off, they lose control of the emotion. It's random but rational. They're going to lose it for like a minute or two. They're going to regain their composure. They're going to feel really bad about themselves. So the best way to parent that, I recommend, weather it. Let them have a little mood reactivity, calm them down, don't engage it. And a minute or two later, they're going to look and say, I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to do that. You're good, buddy. You're good. Okay, moves on. Second way that we might see it is a complete full-on emotional flooding because of parietal overload. That's actually going back more to stuff that we had talked about and we'll talk about more with trauma, but it's actually a fight or flight response. Once the fight or flight response gets engaged, you've got a minimum of 20 minutes of complete irrationality, complete rage, emotional reactivity. Your child thinks that you're a polar bear that's trying to maul them. Back to my polar bear. And so they're going to fight with everything that they have to stop you. So how do you deal with that? Well, you protect the child, you protect yourself, and you create an environment where they can recover. Now, what if we go back to that? Remember, we talked about that low voltage style, right? What if you have low voltage? Well, a low voltage individual is going to destabilize because they don't have the resources to handle it. And they're going to be like angry and lose it because they can't control it. And so that's the kid where you go in there and say, pull it together, Junior. Pull it together right now. Okay, Dad. Okay. And you become the strength for them. Now we look at a fourth one, which could go back to something like a slow background alpha speed. Remember, we said you can feel overwhelmed and completely like off your keister because there's too much information. I'm overwhelmed. And sometimes those kids are going to dig in their heels and go, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it anymore. Stop it. Back off, back off. The reality is they're overwhelmed because they had too much information too fast. So now what do? Okay, bud, take a breath. I want to help you to take a breath. Okay. And you give them a 15-minute break. Let them go run around, do something fun, come back, boom, you're back at it. Why do I say this? Because in all 4 cases, you're going to have very similar initial symptom presentations that are coming from 4 completely different places. And the way you want to choose to parent that child is completely different.
Jeff just highlighted how you can actually like interact with biomarkers, though. You see what I'm saying? Like that to me, and, neurofeedback is a way to interact with them, on the language that they speak. But right here saying like, okay, based on information, I have the power to parent with more appropriate accuracy, right? That's extremely powerful.
That's amazing. Well, that sounds like a good place to leave listeners. Do you guys have any closing thoughts on ADHD, anything like that? I mean, my encouragement is, again, how will you know until you look at it, until you lift up that hood? Anything else you guys want to leave the listeners with?
I mean, I feel like Jeff just hit us with such a great all-inclusive, like, culmination of how you can take some of this information that might be tough to grasp at this point. And as you stick with the podcast, you're going to see a lot of the same things pop up in terms of us talking about alpha, beta, theta, delta, the waves. You're going to start to understand the language, and some of this is going to, hopefully make a little bit more sense. But information is power. If you don't look for the information, you can't really expect things to go any differently than they are. And if they're not going well, I think you know what to do.
Yeah, I think we really I hope we nailed it and gave very concrete examples to folks of the fact that we can actually make sense of what is actually going on behind the diagnosis. We can create specificity, we can validate, we can give insight. I wanted to kind of wrap up with something. I was talking before, I said to Vince, I want to put you on the spot as we're kind of wrapping up. And I wanted to use you as an example of somebody that, if you meet Vince, you're going to realize that there are elements in him where you could say ADHD. Yep. Nodding his head over here.
I showed it at least 3 times in this episode. At least one was very obvious. And I'm over here.
One of the things when I interviewed you and I was bringing you on staff, deciding to bring you on staff, one of the things that struck me was, now you'd never done neurofeedback, never received treatment, anything like that. One of the things that I knew was this guy's got like this crazy brain. It's always thinking, always figuring things out. It's always busy. This guy's like hyper. He's always on his game, right? I could always, but one of the things I knew was this is one of the most extraordinary individuals I've ever met. And the point that I wanted to make on this was you took everything that could have become a liability in your brain, things that could cause you to be distracted or, I don't know, to not be able to stay focused, to be all over the place, and you harnessed it in order to be excellent at everything you do. One of the things that Vince is so good at, he's an avid learner. And if he wants to master something, he takes all of his energy and he puts himself into it and he masters it, which is like absolutely extraordinary. Like, I hope that folks that are out there get a chance to meet him. You
almost brought me to tears, man. No, you almost made me cry just because I'm like, oh, I appreciate that. Like, big time.
Vince is pretty cool. We like him a lot here.
The key behind all of this is, please keep in mind, you are not a prisoner of everything that your brain gives you. Right now, I get it. There's a lot of folks that are going to feel like they're trapped. We want to help get you untrapped. We want to help you get to a place where you can override and actually cope with and deal with a lot of things that are going on that are, in a sense, sabotaging your life. And at the same point, there are so many people that actually take hold of those features and override them and use them for strength, use them for good, And what I want to say is that those are the instances of character. That character is the ability to override it, basically because of your decision, your willpower, the essence of who it is that you want to be. And the cool thing is when you train people that have developed and cultivated character, even when it becomes easier, you don't lose the character. Those are the traits, And so, anyway, I hope I embarrassed you on some level. That Vince is a guy of great character. And
like, do I fit in the
Yeah.
frame still? No, I appreciate that very much, and I have always viewed ADHD as I became aware of it as having the engine of a Ferrari in an old station wagon, and that has kind of been my little thought to push me through on some of those moments.
That's awesome. Well, that's awesome. Again, listeners at home, thank you for bearing with us this far. I hope that it was beneficial to you, that you learned something. If you want to hear more, we've got our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all the places. Go like, subscribe, comment, leave questions. We want to hear from you guys. What are some questions you might think of based off of these episodes and the things we're talking about? But yeah. I think that pretty much wraps us up.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.